But there have been times when I know I was going through a lot of emotional stress and my eating habits were awful.
Room 434 at the Beverly Hilton is not just another hotel suite. For many, it has become a shadowed landmark, a place where the glamour of Hollywood collided with a reality too dark to ignore. On the evening of February 9th, 2012, Whitney Houston checked into that very room, preparing for a pre-Grammy party. At first glance, it seemed like any other night, a radiant superstar stepping through the lobby, smiling politely, carrying a paper bag of food. She looked tired, yes, but she looked alive, ready for another event in a life full of them. What no one knew was that behind that door, time itself was about to stop. When investigators entered room 434 hours later, they did not just find the lifeless body of one of the greatest voices in music history. They found something far more unsettling, traces of a story that didn't align neatly with the headlines that would later be published. There were fragments of meals left uneaten, bottles of champagne without alcohol in her blood, song lyrics scrawled in a rush, and personal mementos hidden in an old suitcase. And then there were the things far more sinister: the white powder on a spoon, the rolled foil, the 12 prescription bottles from 5 different doctors. The FBI cataloged everything. They sealed it in evidence bags, took photographs, recorded every trace. But the room itself still seemed to whisper. It told a story of contradictions, of someone who was both preparing for a glamorous night and quietly carrying unbearable weight. And then, just as quickly, the whisper stopped, because the strangest part of all was not what the FBI found, but what they couldn't. Certain items had vanished before police could even get there. Sheets, documents, traces that might have filled in the gaps. Room 434 was not just the scene of a tragedy, it was the scene of a mystery. What really happened inside that hotel suite? Who else may have been there? And why do the details, even over a decade later, refuse to align into a clean, simple truth? Tonight, we open the door to room 434 and step into a story that changed everything we thought we knew about Whitney Houston's final night, February 9th, 2012. Whitney Houston was a guest many at the Beverly Hilton recognized instantly, though she tried to carry herself with a quiet grace that evening. Cameras caught her in a long coat, clutching a small paper bag from a nearby restaurant. Inside, as an attendant later recalled, was a simple meal: a hamburger, French fries, and a chicken sandwich. To the outside world, Whitney was the diva, the voice of a generation. But inside that bag was the kind of food anyone might grab after a long rehearsal, a reminder that legends still crave normality. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, passed through the hallway, and entered room 434. The world outside was buzzing with pre-Grammy energy, but inside, her night began with silence. Hours later, when the FBI finally walked into that same room, the meal was still there. The hamburger half-eaten, fries scattered, a sandwich untouched. On the table sat an unopened champagne bottle and several half-drunk cans of beer. Yet when the toxicology results came back, investigators noted something chilling. There was no alcohol in Whitney's system, so who were the drinks for? One FBI agent later described something unusual. As he entered the room, past the half-finished meal, past the scattered cans, a faint scent hung in the air. Not perfume, not smoke. It was olive oil. Whitney, close friends revealed, had a simple habit. She often used olive oil in her baths, a private ritual for relaxation. To those who knew her, the scent was instantly familiar, but to investigators, it was like a ghostly trace, an invisible fingerprint no stranger could have left behind. Then came the notes, found near the bed, scraps of paper with rushed handwriting. Some looked like fragments of unreleased song lyrics. Others seemed more personal, as though she were talking to herself or to someone who wasn't there. They spoke of pressure, of rejection, of feeling scrutinized, not for her voice, but for her appearance. To read them was to glimpse the loneliness beneath her fame. And then there was the suitcase, tucked in the closet, worn from years of travel. It didn't contain glamorous gowns or jewelry. Instead, inside were deeply personal items, a Polaroid photograph of Whitney and her mother in a recording studio, an old cassette tape of a practice session, and a Bible with several dog-eared pages. Each object seemed chosen, not for display, but for comfort. To the FBI, these discoveries weren't just items. They were fragments of her final hours. The unfinished meal, the olive oil scent, the handwritten lyrics, the suitcase of mementos. They painted a picture of a woman at once preparing for the spotlight and retreating into herself. A woman both idolized and deeply isolated. But the contradictions in room 434 didn't end there, because what investigators discovered in the bathroom pulled the case into darker, far more troubling territory. The bathroom was where the tone of the investigation shifted from quiet sadness to something more disturbing. As agents stepped inside, the details became undeniable. A stainless steel spoon inverted on the sink, its surface dusted with a fine white residue. Next to it, a piece of foil rolled tightly, its edges scorched and damp. These weren't innocent objects. They were unmistakable signs of recent drug use. Forensic tests confirmed the powder was cocaine. The toxicology report matched. It wasn't just rumor now. It was evidence, still warm with the touch of the woman who had once been the voice of a generation. For investigators, the impact was jarring. The world knew of Whitney's struggles, but to see the tools laid out in front of them was a confrontation with her reality in its rawest form. Under the sink, they found more. A clear plastic bag containing empty pill bottles, cigarette filters burned at the ends, and paraphernalia associated with illicit use. The smell inside was unforgettable, burnt, chemical, harsh. It made one investigator later say that the room didn't just look like a place of use, it felt like one. Other details told of someone unsteady, struggling. A washcloth hung loosely over the tub, still wet. Water streaks marked the floor, as though something had been spilled in a rush. The mirror above the sink was fogged with steam, but smudged with vertical handprints, like someone had tried to see themselves through the haze and failed. And then came the question that haunted everyone. Was she alone? Hours before Whitney was found, a floor attendant claimed to have seen a tall man in a heavy coat and hat leaving the 4th floor by the stairwell, not the main lobby. Security footage showed only a blurred outline, but his presence raised suspicions. If true, who was he? And why did he leave in such a hurry? Some investigators pointed to the eerie order of the bathroom. The spoon, the foil, the bag under the sink. They weren't scattered randomly. They were placed neatly, almost too neatly, as if someone had tidied the scene, arranging chaos into something cleaner. But why? To hide their presence? Or to send a message? For friends and fans, this was the hardest part. Whitney was not just an addict. She was a fighter, a survivor, someone who had faced the glare of the world for decades. To imagine her last hours defined by the coldness of a spoon and a bag under a sink was heartbreaking. Yet, in that bathroom, the story was undeniable. Room 434 was no longer just the place where Whitney Houston died. It was the place where her private struggles and public image collided in the starkest way. And it left a question hanging in the air. Was this truly the end of her own choices? Or was someone else there, shaping how her final moments would be remembered? If the bathroom revealed the immediate evidence of substance use, the cabinet near the minibar revealed the slow, grinding reality of dependency. When FBI agents opened it, they didn't find alcohol or snacks. Instead, they found 12 prescription bottles lined up in neat rows. The orange vials all bore the name Whitney E. Houston. At first glance, it might have looked like simple medical care, but the details made investigators uneasy. The bottles came from 5 different doctors, spanning 3 states: New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. The prescriptions included Xanax for anxiety, Flexeril for muscle relaxation, Benadryl for allergies, ibuprofen for pain, Midol for menstrual cramps, and even amoxicillin, a basic antibiotic. Some bottles were nearly empty, others still sealed. The dates stretched across weeks and months, suggesting a web of overlapping treatments. The toxicology report confirmed traces of some of these drugs in her system, along with cocaine. It was not a conventional overdose. Instead, it appeared to be what experts call a toxic cocktail, small amounts of multiple substances, each compounding the effects of the others until her body could no longer carry the load. One investigator later remarked that what struck him wasn't the quantity, but the image. To see those bottles, lined up quietly in a cabinet, spoke not of reckless indulgence, but of desperation to stay afloat. Xanax to sleep, Flexeril to ease pain after performances, Benadryl for her allergies, ibuprofen for headaches, antibiotics for infections. It looked almost ordinary until you realized that altogether they painted a portrait of someone caught in a cycle of exhaustion and fragile survival. And yet, the system had failed her. Multiple doctors prescribing simultaneously with no one monitoring the bigger picture. A dry FBI note recorded in the file read simply, "Mental and physical health not adequately monitored." Those bottles were not loud like the spoon on the sink. They didn't scream of chaos, but they whispered something more haunting, that Whitney Houston may not have been trying to chase pleasure at all. She was trying to cope, patching herself together pill by pill until her body couldn't hold on anymore. If the cabinet whispered, the bathtub screamed. When investigators opened the bathroom door fully, the air was still thick with steam. Whitney Houston lay face down in the tub, the water still warm, hovering between 91 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was enough to feel recent, as if her presence had not yet faded from the room. There was blood, a faint streak from her nose across pale skin. A small cut marked her forehead, with faint bruises along her arms and legs. They were not severe enough to suggest a direct attack, but they weren't dismissible either. On her elbows, investigators noticed faint vertical scars, old injection marks that told of another chapter in her struggles. The tub itself carried clues. A washcloth draped over the edge, still damp. The mirror fogged, hand-streaked, as if she had tried to look at herself through the mist. An attendant had told investigators she heard the sound of running water from room 434 hours before the discovery, the faucet starting, stopping, then starting again. This detail suggested Whitney had been in that bathroom for a long time, long enough for the air itself to feel suffocating. Forensic experts later suggested the water may have played a role in her rapid decline. Warm water dilates blood vessels, lowers blood pressure, and when combined with cocaine and sedatives, it could have caused her to lose consciousness faster than expected. It was not the official cause, but it was a chilling possibility that the very thing meant to relax her became the final weight pulling her under. The image seared itself into the minds of those present. Whitney, the woman who had commanded stadiums with her voice, reduced to silence in a hotel bathtub. No applause, no cameras, only the faint drip of a faucet and the hum of an air conditioner. The bathtub became not just a place of death, but a mirror reflecting the two sides of her life. On stage, unstoppable; in private, fragile; and in room 434, those two sides collided with a violence that left investigators shaken. If the bathroom and cabinet showed what was left behind, the most unsettling detail was what had disappeared. By the time police officially entered room 434, some items were already missing. According to whispers from inside the investigation, the bed had no sheets. A bare mattress greeted officers with no explanation of where the bedding had gone. In death investigations, sheets can be vital, holding DNA, blood, or trace evidence. Their disappearance was not a simple oversight. It was a hole ripped out of the narrative. Even stranger was the missing driver's license. Whitney Houston's ID, a critical personal document, was nowhere to be found. For someone of her fame, it was not an item that would casually vanish. To some investigators, it looked deliberate, as if someone wanted to complicate identification or control what information reached the press. To others, it seemed more sinister, a souvenir stolen by someone who had entered the room before law enforcement. The rumors only deepened with security footage. Though never officially released, insiders claim the cameras caught two unidentified men entering and leaving the fourth floor around the time Whitney is believed to have died. Both wore baseball caps and large coats, keeping their faces down. The footage was too blurry to identify them, but clear enough to suggest they weren't hotel staff. Were these men connected to the missing items? Were they cleaners, handlers, or something more threatening? For those who stood in that room, the absence of the sheets and ID was more disturbing than the presence of the drugs. It suggested someone else's hand at work, someone who had time and composure to remove evidence before authorities arrived. One investigator compared it to reading a novel where whole chapters had been torn out. The story of room 434 could be pieced together, but crucial sections were gone forever. And it was those gaps that gave rise to the darkest theories. Because when evidence vanishes in the hours before an official investigation, the question is no longer just what happened, but who wanted us not to know. When the FBI finished their work in room 434, they carried away bags of evidence, the spoon dusted with powder, the neatly rolled foil, the prescription bottles, the damp towels, the unfinished notes, and the worn suitcase filled with fragments of Whitney's private life. They logged every detail, photographed every angle, and filed their reports. On paper, the conclusion would read clearly: drowning caused by heart failure, with cocaine and prescription drugs listed as contributing factors. It was presented as tragic but simple, a star who had fought for years against addiction, finally succumbing to the weight of her struggles. But anyone who stood inside that room knew better. The story wasn't simple, it wasn't neat. There were contradictions. Drinks in the room without alcohol in her blood, a hamburger and fries left abandoned mid-bite, song lyrics scrawled as if she was speaking to someone unseen, the Bible with its pages marked, the missing sheets, the missing driver's license, the blurred men on the security camera. Each detail might mean nothing in isolation, but together they formed a mosaic that refused to align into a perfect picture. And that is why room 434 has never stopped haunting people. Because it didn't just hold the end of a life, it held questions that remain suspended in the air like steam off that bathtub. For some, the mystery is too heavy to bear, and they cling to the official report. It was an accident, a tragedy, nothing more. For others, the gaps scream louder than the evidence itself. Theories of tampering, of debts, of unseen hands moving quietly through the Beverly Hilton still linger more than a decade later. Each side finds support in the fragments, because the fragments never fully connect. But beyond the forensic reports and the whispered conspiracies lies a deeper truth, one that doesn't require a theory to be understood. Whitney Houston was not just a victim of one night in a hotel. She was the victim of a lifetime of pressures, of an industry that demanded perfection, of a culture that consumed her talent while ignoring her pain. Every pill bottle in that cabinet, every smudge on that mirror, every note left unfinished was part of a long struggle to hold herself together beneath the crushing weight of expectation. In that sense, the mystery of room 434 isn't just about who was there or what vanished before police arrived. It's about the hidden cost of brilliance, the cost of being Whitney Houston. The Beverly Hilton continues to host parties, laughter, and celebrations. But for those who know the story, room 434 is marked forever. Fans still stop outside the door, some leaving flowers, others standing in silence. Some even claim they hear faint sounds of running water in the hallway, as though the room itself refuses to be silent. Whitney Houston's voice, immortalized in songs that span generations, has never faded. "I Will Always Love You" still echoes across radios, weddings, and stages worldwide. But alongside that eternal melody is another sound, the unresolved, uneasy silence of room 434. A silence filled with unfinished meals, missing evidence, unanswered questions, and the echoes of a woman who was both legend and human. Perhaps that is why this story continues to grip us, because we are not just asking what killed Whitney Houston. We are asking what it means for a legend to live and die in a world that loved her music but never fully saved her soul. And in that way, room 434 has never truly gone quiet. It still speaks, not in whispers, but in screams that remind us that some mysteries, like some voices, never fade.